This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Well, we certainly have a lot to talk about today. Actually, I have a lot to talk about. Y'all are just going to sit there and listen. I knew it was going to be a busy weekend, so I took the precaution of getting a head start with some of the classic footage. And looking back, I'm very glad I decided to watch the retro In Your House PPV last week, because that saved me a 3-hour window on Saturday for detox time. Because Lord knows I needed it. But I kept all my notes together, and I'm ready to get rolling with today's show. And hopefully you all are too. Before we start, make sure you subscribe, comment, like if you have not already. This is the 5 Starr Wrestling Report podcast, the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everybody needs. And you are definitely in need of some counterculture opinions when it comes to wrestling today. There's a lot of shilling going on, especially with today's so-called experts and journalists. I use those quotes loosely. The people reporting on wrestling on a daily basis and the ones that have a comfy pay cushion by talking about how great things are in the world of AEW or how wonderful and perfect WWE is now that Hunter's in charge. Well, I got news for you. As someone who is not on any kind of payroll, both companies have plenty of issues that need to be addressed. It's just a question of who are the people out there that don't have a problem saying the quiet part out loud. Which brings me to the Saturday night's main event from over the weekend. And I actually want to start this review off by talking about a subject that I'm sure will piss a lot of people off. Since I don't really follow much of the current product, I haven't really chimed in with my thoughts on WWE introducing 2 different sets of women's mid-card belts. And of course, right out of the gate, there's like 5 different issues that immediately smack you in the face. Just the simple fact that they've already diluted the meaning of it by introducing 2 different sets of girls' mid-card belts, as opposed to just one. Then you have to factor in that they're literal carbon copies of the men's US and Intercontinental belts. The only difference is the strap is a different color. And so they're not even going out of their way to create an original belt that's unique to the women's division. They're just copying the old Vince McMahon model of replicating similar looking belts and then slapping a new logo on them. Or changing up the color schemes. Beyond just the whole presentation factor, I even remember talking about this when I did the card preview a couple weeks back. Just the whole idea of introducing more belts. It's the same shit I used to complain about with AEW having way too many goddamn belts. There's already an oversaturation problem of meaningless titles across both major promotions. I've beaten this dead horse for years when it comes to me talking about how worthless the men's US and IC belts are. I mean, I know fans often like to think they actually have value, now that they aren't just props being carried around by geeks like Santino Marella. But come on, man. Be objective. And we're basically going on 30 plus years of mid-card titles not meaning a fucking thing in wrestling. They already killed the appeal of every undercard belt during the height of the Monday Night Wars, when belts would just flip-flop every week on television and title reigns became utterly worthless. And let's not try and pretend like they matter now that Hunter's in charge of overseeing the product. I mean, you want the latest example of them fucking up someone's title reign? They put the US title on LA Knight and didn't do jack shit with them. If anything, him beating Logan Paul now just comes off like a consolation prize for him being the breakout star for WWE last year. Despite all their attempts at burying him and getting him under as opposed to over. So now we're essentially dealing with the same dilemma of trying to establish women's US and IC titles. First of all, and I said it before, I will say it again. Who is the audience for this? What market is actually clamoring for more girls' titles? If they've pulled numbers on it, I would love to see the stats. I would love to see the demo that's actually advocating for this kind of stuff. Because it ain't me, brother. I'll tell you that much. Second of all, let's talk about some of the girls they push as the frontrunners in these tournaments. As of this current recording, we still don't even know who the finalists are going to be for the women's IC title tournament. But when I looked at the brackets to see who they were promoting in some of the earlier rounds, to me, I mean, it just looked like a giant schmoz of nobodies. And by that, I mean female talent that's not necessarily over and or girls that probably shouldn't even be on cable television to begin with, given their experience or ability at this point. I don't know who Lyra Valkyria is. I believe I've heard the name mentioned in passing, but I surely couldn't pick her out of a police lineup. She might be one of the latest NXT 2.0 call-ups for all I know. God, with a name like Lyra Valkyria, I wouldn't be all that surprised. But I'm just looking at these earlier rounds, and the question I keep going back to over and over again, where are the actual stars? Where's Becky Lynch? Where's Rhea Ripley? Where's Bianca Belair? Where are the actual names that matter? I mean, I saw they had Bayley in the US tournament, but apparently they jobbed her out in the semifinals to Chelsea fucking Green. And nobody has more turn the channel heat, in my humble opinion, than Chelsea Green. I know some of y'all indie darlings love you some Chelsea Green, but no. No, to me, she's always been overrated. Her peak was in TNA back in the mid-2010s when she was a comedy character. In no rational world would I ever buy her as championship material. Especially if it's a belt I'm supposed to take seriously. Then, of course, there's the other obvious question. Why are they introducing two brand new women's mid-card belts when they've never been able to get over their women's tag belts? Your guess is as good as mine. Probably because they never had a suitable women's tag division to begin with, but they had to try to force it on everybody because diversity, equity, and inclusion. And let's be honest, that's exactly what all this bullshit's about. It's not about them rewarding the girls for being of equal value to the men as draws. Yeah, this has been WWE's mission/agenda of the new era for decades. To force and cram more women's wrestling down your throat, despite there not being a demand for it. And that's not me being openly hostile or misogynist. I'm just spitting the cold hard facts. Nobody is demanding this. Nobody is asking for this. At least on a collective level. There's not enough female talent in either major wrestling promotion that's AEW or WWE to justify them having like 4 or 5 different sets of girls' titles. Whether that's mid-card, tag, or main event. Doesn't matter. In the hierarchy of truly great female talent in WWE, I can probably count on one hand the amount of girls there are. You have Rhea Ripley, Bianca Belair, Bayley, Becky Lynch, maybe. And then there's a massive drop-off after that. And I'm sorry, but I'm not sold on the idea that more belts is the solution. I think it's counterproductive. If your end game is to try to give the girls more screen time, there are way better solutions than to try to force it on your primetime flagship programs. If the demand was truly that high, then what I would recommend is WWE marketing and running a special 1 or maybe even 2-hour midweek show solely dedicated to the girls. And the reality is, the reason WWE would never do it, it would absolutely tank. Because nobody wants to watch 2 straight hours of mostly bad women's wrestling with talent that's not over and not ready for cable television. Plain and simple. Like how many people were actually watching those early prelim matches in the IC title tournament? When the matches were Zoe Stark versus Katana Chance versus Lyra Valkyria. They're fucking Michin, Alpha Fire, and Ishmael Dawn. Now, you're telling me there wasn't a massive drop in viewership when those matches were being aired on Raw? Find that hard to believe. So no, I didn't watch the Chelsea Green Michin finals. And it's nothing against either girl personally. But I don't see the value in Chelsea Green as any kind of major champion for a wrestling organization. Especially when her entire gimmick is that she's supposed to be an airhead that nobody takes seriously. And Mia Yim's been wasted potential in WWE since her NXT run. This is what you settled on as the finals to try to crown a new female champion? A girl that's been comedy fodder since she showed up? And another girl that's been just another Chex Mix in the cereal bowl? Look, here's the thing. Even if you wanted to argue that a match like this could feasibly work for an audience, you want to know what that audience is? It is a very, very, very small subset of internet fans that used to be avid watchers of Shimmer Wrestling. And when was the last time anybody even remotely mentioned Shimmer in passing? Exactly. But that's the kind of brand that WWE needs to really consider. If you want these girls to have a place on the card, that's the kind of strategy I recommend you take. You should be marketing that. You consolidate most of the underneath or middle card female talent on an all-women's exclusive program. They can do storylines, they can wrestle matches for the audience that's genuinely interested in watching that. And then for your flagship programs, Raw and SmackDown, well, that's where you get the best utilization out of girls like Rhea and Bianca and Io and... I mean, I'll even throw Jade Cargill into that equation. Because at least she looks like somebody. She's presented like somebody that matters. But my God, this collective mid-card talent pool with the Chelsea Greens and the Alpha Fires and the Candice LeRae's and the fucking Nia Jaxes of the world. Well, first of all, I just fire Nia Jax altogether because she's utterly useless no matter what program she's on. But that's where the vast majority of these girls really should be wrestling. And if that's too controversial for the beta whip pussy wrestling fans of today's generation, tough shit. Grow up and learn to accept the reality of where we are. Whatever your perceived value is for the bulk of the female talent in WWE, it's not as valuable as you're being led to believe. So with that little pre-show tangent out of the way, let's go ahead and run down the stuff I actually did watch on the card. The opener with Drew McIntyre and Sami Zayn. This is a pretty good match. And I actually kind of like the backstory they set up here. It did seem a little odd at first to think that this is what they had planned for Drew after the Punk feud. And spoiler for my match of the year list, but it's highly improbable that anything I've talked about this year is going to come remotely close to topping that Cell match. But to go from that to working the curtain jerker against Sami Zayn, I don't really know what to make of all that. Like Drew wanting to take out anybody previously associated with Roman's bloodline. But that's my understanding of what they're trying to do here. But the reason I find it intriguing is that, it keeps Drew preoccupied with fresh material not directly related to Punk. At the same time, it's not really a regression in terms of anything he was doing previously, because he's still working with upper mid-card and main event guys. And like I said, the match I thought was good. The only detractor, and it was really the story of the entire show, because they were simulcasting on Peacock and NBC, I was basically watching the show as if it were airing on television, so the commercials just got in the way of everything. I mean, it was impossible to truly enjoy any match on the show. But they worked a very basic modern style match. Didn't get overly excessive with the kickouts and near falls. They did just enough to keep the fans engaged throughout. They had Sami have Drew in position for the haluva kick, but then Drew bailed to the floor. When Sami went to chase him, Drew rolled back in and then caught him with a Claymore kick out of nowhere for the finish. Definitely agree with the call. You're bringing Drew back. It's his first match since the Cell match with Punk. He absolutely needed to go over here. I don't even think that was part of the conversation. I don't really know what the end game is with Drew going after all former Bloodline faction teammates. We're talking about the original Bloodline, because it seems like he's more interested in targeting Roman's group as opposed to Solo's group. So that pretty much narrows the talent pool down to the Usos and Roman, right? Oddly enough, I guess now CM Punk. Maybe you throw Cody in there too, because, he did team up with Roman. I don't really think we need to see another Drew versus Punk match. Nothing they do at this point is going to top what they did in the Cell. But I am willing to see where they go with all this. When it comes to Liv Morgan and Io Sky, again, man, it all goes back to the conversation I just had a minute ago. I like Io, but her wrestling Liv isn't going to get me to want to watch her match, especially when the finish is predictable as fuck. Liv Morgan beating Io Sky clean in any sane universe is insulting. I don't care whether or not it's a work. I don't know, dude. At this point, I think I'm just ready to see Rhea win the belt. This feud with her and Liv has long since overstayed its welcome. They shot the angle with Dom turning on Rhea and aligning with Liv. It was the best thing I've ever seen them do with Liv as an on-screen talent. But she's just not clicking as a champion. And as long as she's still holding one of the belts, evidently I'm going to have to watch her wrestle. And I just don't buy Liv on the same plane as somebody like a Rhea or a Bianca or a Bayley. They're not in the same class. No matter how much they try to force her on me as a top star, I don't buy it. She's a puny, scrawny, 90-pound chick with a nice ass that I would buy more as a cover on a Playboy magazine than a top heel. Sorry, not sorry. There are just certain female athletes that I look at and think, nothing about this woman looks visibly threatening. Liv is one of those talents. Let me just put it this way. If Liv and I got into a confrontation in an alleyway, I wouldn't fear for my safety. Hopefully that clears the air. So then we had Gunther, Damian Priest, and Finn Balor in a three-way for the World Heavyweight title. And let me just go ahead and get the typical obvious complaint out of the way. Yes, it is another fucking three-way for no reason. Yes, I still hate three-ways, and four-ways, and five-ways, and anything that remotely is considered a multi-man clusterfuck. This is a textbook case of one of these guys is not like the others. Gunther, Damian Priest, Finn Balor. You do the math. And it sucks because I like the match between Priest and Balor at the last PLE. Or not Priest and Balor, it was Priest and Gunther. The World Heavyweight title match, the one at Survivor Series, right? That was the last PLE, correct? I don't know how I immediately forgot. But it's the multi-man principle, bro. It really is. The minute you needlessly throw another body into the fray, it just muddies up everything and overcomplicates the match unnecessarily. Someone needs to calculate this for me. Out of every single WWE PLE we've seen this year, how many of them did not directly involve some kind of three-way or four-way? Men or women? It just seems like every major PLE they've run this year, every single one of them has had some kind of multi-man or multi-woman match. Most of which I could easily argue do not have to be multi-man matches to begin with. I just miss when wrestling cards were singles and tags only. And if you did have a three-way or a four-way, there was at least a real story reason to have one. Not some half-assed last-minute decision because they needed to clutter up the card with more people. I'll give you a perfect example. That Mania match with Sheamus, Drew McIntyre, and Gunther last year, I think it was for the IC title, when Gunther was still the champion. That was the perfect scenario where doing a three-way made sense. Because you already had the multi-layered things where Drew and Sheamus were beefing with Gunther, but then you started having Drew and Sheamus get sideways with each other because they both believed they had a valid case for getting the title shot, despite that they were real-life friends. But you could buy it. And it all came together very organically. It wasn't forced. Now, let's be honest, the only reason Balor was in this match was to eat the pinfall. I can't even reasonably call this a passable three-way. It was so forgettable, I completely blanked on everything that happened in the match when the bell rang. My bullet points read, they did a bunch of moves in standard three-way spots. Someone would do a big move, go for a pin, get pulled away. And then someone else would do another big move, go for a pin, and get pulled away again. It's so square, so formulaic with the way they do these things. And it culminates with Gunther giving Priest the powerbomb in the ring steps after he nearly lost his grip when he tried to pick him up. I think that's because Priest got his foot caught under the steps. And then Gunther slid back in the ring and gave Balor a powerbomb for the 3. It was a safeguard, so Priest didn't have to do another job. At the same time, this Gunther-Priest feud has been nothing but a buffer program. And I don't know where it leaves Gunther in terms of suitable challengers. But I guess we'll see what they have planned headed into next year. So, of course, after that match, that's where they had Chelsea and Mia for the inaugural U.S. Girls title or whatever the fuck it's called. I will at least say this. The Long Island crowd really wanted Chelsea to win this match, despite that she was the obvious heel. So then you had the fucked up psychology of the villain getting showered with cheers when she evidently pinned Mia to win the belt. I mean, apparently Chelsea's got a cult following of some description. And you know what? I'm sure that cult would gladly follow her working on a completely separate wrestling program counter to Raw and SmackDown. But we'll see how frequently they even bother to have girls' mid-card championships being defended on PLEs in 2025. You know, especially how rare it is we see the men defending the US and IC titles on PLEs. I mean, why the hell would I think the women's mid-card belts are going to take priority? Especially if this is the talent pool they have to work with. Whew. And I actually consider Mia Yim a pretty decent wrestler, but... whew. I don't know, dude. It is rough times ahead. So with that... hey, wouldn't you know it? We've arrived at the main event. The only match on the card I was really looking forward to seeing, judging by the clips I've watched on YouTube. I mean, they seem to have done a reasonably coherent job in getting to this point of Kevin Owens turning heel on Cody Rhodes, and him being bitter about Cody siding with Roman after everything he in the bloodline had put KO through for the last several years. I mean, there was a lot of thought they put into this. Now, of course, the minute they brought Jesse Ventura over to be the third color guy, I was glued to the monitor because, dude, I didn't know what the fuck to expect with that lunatic. The glory that is Jesse the Body Ventura. Was he going to be civilized and try to call the show objectively? Or was he going to be interrupting Cole and McAfee the entire time trying to talk about the Gulf of Tonkin? Or him being able to hold his breath underwater for 15 minutes as a Navy SEAL? And you just never know what kind of batshit stories he's got on tap. I was actually kind of waiting for him to start shooting facts about the first handful of Saturday night's main events. And then when Pat asks him to clarify something, Jesse just goes, well, why don't you tell me what happened? I was in the garden when undercover CIA agents were monitoring Vince from the nosebleeds. I could have told you he was a predator back then. Jesse, what are you talking about? Well, why don't you tell me? Oh, by the way, me improvising with Jesse Ventura stuff, it was all highly more intriguing to me than anything that happened in the match. Is it fair to say this is the most predictable, lame, and uninteresting title match we've seen Cody have? When I tell you that something did not live up to the hype, nothing better exemplifies that than whatever this Cody Rhodes-Kevin Owens match was supposed to be. I mean, saying they played it safe here, that would still probably be giving it too much credit. I don't know, there was just nothing to it. They had a wrestling match. Can't say it was good, can't say it was bad. It was a match. They kind of worked a story where Owens was going after Cody's previously bummed ankle, only when it was convenient in the overall scope of the spots they were doing. Because then there were just blatant moments where Cody was springing off the ropes like his ankle was totally fine, not even trying to pay attention to continuity. Like, the best part in this was anytime Jesse called out Cody and Kevin for being idiots, not going for pin attempts, or placating to the crowd too often. Now, that's the old school disgruntled ring vet talking right there. Now that everything in modern wrestling is showboaty, they have to milk every moment. Meanwhile, Jesse's sitting there like, fuck that noise. Go for the pin attempts, you numbskulls. And again, I'm already trying to overlook the commercial break stuff because that already hindered my enjoyment of the match, even with the picture-in-picture. I mean, I guess the closing minutes are really the big talking points when you boil it all down. I don't know what the hell this whole finishing sequence was supposed to accomplish. I mean, it really didn't paint Cody in the best light. So they do the 2 ref bump angles, which seemed like overkill already. I mean, I was okay with the first one with Charles Robinson, but, well, I mean, when they did it with the other ref, whose name I can never remember, I was like, really, do we need that? And there was already a lot going on with KO getting visual pins on Cody anyway. But by the time they got to the spot where KO brings in a chair, they do the angle where Cody makes his comeback and gives Owens the crossroads on the chair for the 3 count. Even with Jesse blatantly calling out the fact that Cody cheated in order to retain the strap. Is that really the initial finish you came up with? I mean, I'm not even necessarily implying or suggesting that Owens should have won here. But, I mean, this really didn't help Cody's perception. Why have him win like that? Hey, even as a way to potentially keep the feud going. Yeah, I mean, you can't even really argue it was Cody taking advantage of a situation, because nothing they did during the match ever really built to a critical spot where Cody had any sensible reason to use the chair, out of either frustration or anger. I mean, really, this kind of made the heel more the sympathetic figure. Unless the end game is to turn Cody heel, and I mean, God, you really want to go there? I don't even see the logic in it. Especially when the audience isn't really demanding it. I mean, look. Cody's kind of a polarizing figure right now in WWE. It's not a 50-50 split, but there's a weird dichotomy between casual mainstream fans that are watching WWE and more of like the hardcore internet fan base that's kind of followed Cody's career for years. Let me put it in perspective this way. Cody's WWE run is nothing like his AEW run. I've always been on record saying the AEW thing was always a weird, strange moment in time. The AEW fans turned Cody heel by choice. Different audience, different circumstance. He never stood a chance. He was never going to work out in that environment. WWE's audience on the whole have gladly accepted Cody as their top guy. It is a completely different journey he's taken over the last 2 years to get to this point. And I mean, that's all we heard with Cody since he came back and did that return promo. I've got to finish my story. I've got to finish my story. And you know what? 2 years is a long time. But the people stuck with him to see him finish that story at WrestleMania, to bring everything to closure. You might have a small portion of the WWE audience that boos Cody occasionally. It is nothing like how it was in AEW. Not even close. So, with that in mind, unless the audience is giving you a clear indication that they don't want to cheer or like Cody, why force a heel turn? Or even allude to the idea as such? And why now? Especially as we head into Rumble and Mania season. They're about to start off on a new network. The timing of it just seems very suspect. And I understand they're going to have to take the belt off Cody eventually. He can't be the champion forever. But unless they have somebody waiting in the wings, a new young top babyface that's ready to replace him, again, I don't really see the reason to even be teasing a Cody heel turn right now. I mean, I love Braun Breaker, but is he really truly ready for that spot? I don't think so. And yes, there's obviously way more to the story that they're yet to explain. Maybe I'm just assuming the worst. I have a tendency to do that when it comes to pro wrestling, but I just questioned a lot about the booking in this main event. I also questioned the logic of this apparent post-show exclusive they shot after the show went dark. Didn't they do something very similar with Cody and KO a couple months ago? Which show was that? Was it Bad Blood? And they shot the angle with Owens jumping Cody in the parking lot and beating him up? And remember, that was like the big talking head coming out of that show, not discounting the cell match with Punk and McIntyre. Like, one of the focal topical discussions for everybody was something that didn't even air live on the PLE. It was some exclusive content package that you actually had to go out of your way to seek out on YouTube. And I could at least argue that was a rudimentary enough angle to where you could get away with making it a post-show exclusive. A guy gets jumped in the parking lot. We've only seen that 100,000 times in wrestling over the years. But this angle here, I don't know what the hell they were thinking by not airing this live. Other than the fact that they ran out of airtime because they were limited to a 2-hour window. I mean, this would not have met the threshold unless they would have shaved off an extra 5 minutes somewhere else on the show. I know where I would have shaved off 5 minutes, but I'm also not an agent. So my opinion doesn't mean jack shit. But if you were going to do this, I would not have aired it as a post-show exclusive. Now, yes, it very quickly made its way to YouTube afterwards. But it's another one of those things where you're making the audience actively seek out something that they actually would have to go out of their way to find. And granted, in the internet age, it doesn't take a whole lot to read and hear about things that happen behind the scenes. I mean, we've long since pulled back the curtain there. But there was so much detail that went into what they shot here. KO giving Cody the package pile driver, him stealing the Winged Eagle World title that Cody exclusively brought back for this show, him standing over Cody after they had strapped him to the backboard, which I laughed at, by the way. And then all the rigmarole of them loading Cody into the ambulance. You got Hunter and Nick talking with each other right as they fade to black and end the clip. I mean, this wasn't just a simple heat angle like what we saw at the Bad Blood PLE. This was like a full-length TV angle. Something that really needed attention devoted to it. Something that a wider audience really needed to see in real time. Not a subset of the collective poll that happened to seek it out on YouTube afterwards. Now, of course, they'll probably air this on a television show. It'll be one of the first things they even talk about, if they're smart. And again, because they ran out of airtime, they couldn't air this on the live feed for NBC. Now, I watched this on Peacock. I was shocked they didn't even air it there. Were they also constrained to a 2-hour window on the streaming service? I'd have thought they would have bought more airtime if they knew they were going to book something like this. So, yeah, I really didn't agree with that not being a part of the show. Now, the live audience got to see it unfold. For the rest of the people watching at home, again, they had to go out of their way to find it, either via word of mouth or just browsing the internet after the show. And how many people are really doing that? At 10 p.m. Eastern, I think most people just wanted to go to bed. Now, of course, I mean, it was just a stretcher angle, so I'm sure Cody will be back on television in 2 to 3 weeks. Will he have a neck brace on? Maybe. If he's smart. But, again, it's just one of those goofy things now where we talk about it with the promos in WWE. Those are the real focal talking points of all those television shows. The matches are completely meaningless a lot of the time. I don't want to say meaningless, but subjective. It's kind of the same thing with angles. And this main event is a prime example of that. Cody and Kevin Owens had a championship match. There was nothing wrong with it. A couple weird little quirky things in the booking aspect of it, but it was a world title match. Kind of unmemorable in the grand scheme of things, but what are people going to be exclusively talking about? The stretcher angle. Kevin Owens stealing the Winged Eagle belt. Is it a bad thing? Because it kind of depends on your perspective. But again, it's just the reality of where we are with soap opera drama in professional wrestling today. People primarily tune in to see the promos and angles, and they'll watch the matches. But do people really care about the matches? Because it kind of depends on who's working. I don't know. It's very strange being a fan of wrestling these days. Especially when you're going back 30 plus years like we are and going over all these territory timelines. I mean, I had no qualms with the show as a whole. I didn't even really talk about the production aspect of things. That was well done. The staging, the setup for everything. This is what WWE excels at. They always nailed the production aspect. It looked like an old Saturday night's main event, which is exactly what they were going for. I like the old school referee attire, the Iowa setup. I like that there was no Jumbotron. Everybody just kind of came out to normal ring music. Now, apparently these are going to be recurring events throughout 2025. I don't know how many they plan on running throughout the year, but I guess they'll serve as like intermediary shows between monthly PLEs. I'm not sure if we need one every single month, but if they do like 3 or 4 sporadically throughout the year, that's fine. I don't see an issue with that. I usually don't advocate for more wrestling, because that's the last thing we need in today's oversaturated market. But as long as they have 2-hour caps, there's a strict start time and end time. Not a horrible idea. So I guess it's time to go from one lackluster WWF event to the next. I should have said, out of the frying pan and into the fire. You know what's becoming more and more apparent? As I'm going back and watching all these In Your House pay-per-views. Remember when I said back in May when they ran the first In Your House, I was like, yeah, I really don't remember like the majority of these events offhand. They are such a blur. There's like snippets of moments I can recall from certain events. The hog pen match being one of the more infamous ones, which guess what we get to talk about later. That was a solid 4-finger stinker right there. But we are now on the 5th In Your House event. The final WWF pay-per-view from the year 1995. A blessing in disguise. When I got through watching this, my immediate thought was, why are they even bothering with these fucking things? I mean, the majority of them don't even come across as secondary or even tertiary level pay-per-views. It's like I'm watching a spot show with way better production. And like, I know the whole concept of In Your House was to treat it like a house show event. But God, when you look at the state of some of these cards, most of them don't even feel like house show cards. You know, I said I probably wasn't going to spend an eternity recapping the show. Trust me, you'll thank me for sparing you the time later. They may as well have just taglined the show, The Hershey Highway. Because not only were they in Hershey, PA, but especially with the inclusion of the pig shit, I don't know, the Hershey Highway gimmick would have been quite apropos. So they open with a tag match of Marty Jannetty and Razor Ramon taking on Sid Vicious and the 1-2-3 Kid. One of the very few matches they even bothered to promote consistently on television. Meanwhile, you could see they were already planting the seeds for Razor's next feud after this show was over. Because when he and Jannetty were making their entrances, you saw Goldust sitting in one of the sections blowing kisses toward Razor. And in fact, the whole match is pretty much one big infomercial to sponsor Razor versus Goldust. Because they had Todd Pettingill interviewing Goldust mid-match. That's where we learned that Goldie had a bit of a man crush on the bad guy. He was pointing out his luscious jet black hair and his bushy chest, his muscular stature and great body. One of the best lines from Jerry Lawler all show. The moment you hear he's just totally uncomfortable having to call this, he just goes, "What movie line is that from?" I don't even know what the hell you'd call it. The stalker storyline? The fangirling obsession storyline? Even though we're talking about two grown men. You know what the ironic thing is, too? I'm pretty sure most people today see this shit on television all the time. They don't even bat an eyelash about it. Which really goes to show just how ahead of the curve Vince was when it came to booking this kind of stuff. For better or worse. Wouldn't be the first time he tried to promote the androgynous storyline. I mean, it is the most erotic version of Goldust we've seen since his debut. People often reflect back and remember this version of Goldust very fondly. And it all kind of started right here in December of 1995 with the Razor feud. The feud that I'm sure both men were very uncomfortable doing. As were most people watching at home. To be blunt, that was probably the most noteworthy part about the whole segment. I mean, the tag match was fine, but there was nothing memorable or noteworthy about it. As a curtain jerker, it was properly placed on the card. Razor was super over, as you'd imagine. They kind of had the story going early on where the kid was playing chicken, trying to avoid Razor and keep away from him. The heels worked over Jannetty for a while until Razor got the big tag and ran wild. And then he gets Sid in position for a corner bulldog. He delivers said bulldog, which didn't look all that great to begin with. And then Razor just pins Psycho Sid and beats him 1-2-3. I don't know if that was supposed to be the implied finish or if Sid just really didn't feel like kicking out. It was rather abrupt. I love the post-match where Razor tried to get the kid up into a razor's edge. In his half-assed way of trying to save him, Sid just basically grabbed the kid by his ankle and then jerked him out to the floor. And you actually see the kid get his neck temporarily caught in the middle and top rope. Could have ended horribly. But again, the Goldust thing was the primary focus of the segment. Even though Razor is still technically feuding with the kid. You can kind of see how they're about to transition out of that program and then enter into the next one with Razor and Goldust. I would not call it a smooth transition because, see the parties involved. By the way, if you're wondering what the secret letter was that Goldust gave to Todd in order to pass off to Razor, one can only hope it did not involve any criminal activity and or suspect bodily pics. So coming out of that, we had a series of events take place, much of which included talking. And if there's one thing you always look forward to when you order a pay-per-view, it is copious amounts of stalling with promo activity, which is exactly what the next segment was. So first of all, I don't even know what the hell happened here. Manny Garcia, the ring announcer, just randomly gets up and blurts out, "Nature Boy Buddy Landel is coming." At the same time, you see Jerry Lawler get up from the commentary desk with a microphone. So, he was obviously scheduled to go to the ring. But then he just tells Manny to piss off and sit down. So, of course, now that they've spoiled the fact that Buddy Landel was supposed to be in the building, you're probably expecting Lawler to call out Landel for an interview, right? Oh no, that is incorrect. We got an interview, but it wasn't from Buddy Landel. It was the return of Double J Jeff Jarrett, a man that Lawler considered great. And it was not the only time we would hear the word great mentioned in this promo. By the time this thing was over, you'd have thought either Tony Khan or even Tony the Tiger was sponsoring the segment. Not only was it a great honor to bring in Double J for this interview, it was also his opportunity to gloat about his new record album, Ain't I Great? Yeah, you all remember the Ain't I Great tour, right? With the music video and Jarrett's horrible mismatch lip syncing. What was initially all being done to tease a program between him and the roadie that never happened. Zero mention of the roadie at all during this segment, by the way. They completely wrote him off. And I didn't write down every single solitary bullet point about this. But my God, when I tell you that Jeff came out and talked for seemingly hours on end, I wish I were exaggerating. He talked and 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 talked. I was begging for somebody to cut his mic. And of course, you're thinking, well, someone has to come out to interrupt him, right? Clearly, that's what this is all setting up. Well, again, wrong. No, instead, They finished up their promo. They both walked to the commentary desk right as they were queuing up Shane Douglas's music. Also, he could then come out to, you guessed it, talk. And then Shane promptly talked for another hour. And we've already mentioned at length the whole backstory going into this match. It was originally supposed to be Douglas versus Ahmed Johnson, but then Douglas supposedly injured his back or something, and it prevented him from working this match. And or he realized he was being forced to wrestle Ahmed Johnson and said, nah, that doesn't work for me, brother. So here is where the conversation comes back to Buddy Landell, and we had to pretend like Manny didn't jump the gun or shit the bed by announcing him prior. So, yeah, he was Ahmed's replacement opponent. And I don't know what the initial game plan was for this match. Like, who knows if they were really planning on beating Douglas in 45 seconds. Maybe he thought that was insulting and didn't want to do the job that way. Whatever the case was, Ahmed beat Buddy here with the Pearl River Plunge in under a minute. That's the Tiger Driver finish, by the way. And as quickly as the match was over, Douglas and Landau powdered to the back. They are not seen nor spoken about for the remainder of the night. So that way, Lawler and Jarrett can lure Johnson over to ringside to try to take the piss out of him. They basically goad him into letting his guard down for long enough so Jarrett can hit him over the back of the head with his plaque. And this next part was absolutely baffling. I don't know what the hell Ahmed was thinking here. Clearly somebody did not smart him up as to the concept of what heat was. This next sequence of events, I mean, he totally exposed the business. Jarrett's at ringside hitting Johnson with his record plaque. Just hitting him over and over and over again with it. Then he hits him with a folding chair. He throws him into the ring steps. Just literally doing anything to try to get this dumb motherfucker to sell. And this goddamn meathead Ahmed Johnson, he would not sell anything. He's just bowing up and trying to make his own comeback on Jarrett. And you could see Jarrett legitimately trying to talk some sense into the guy. Like, dude, what are you doing? Finally gets to a point where you see both guys getting into a scrap over the chair in the aisleway. I legitimately think they were shoot fighting over this fucking chair because Jarrett would not let this guy get a hold of it. Probably had a fear for his own safety. So finally, Jarrett just throws the chair over his head and runs to the back. Johnson kind of sort of chases after him, but it's not like he was in a hurry to catch up. And that was the segment. What the hell was that? Did I see what I think I just saw? Were we really seeing Ahmed Johnson in real time refusing to work and cooperate with another talent? I don't know how else to explain what happened here. Because it totally looked like Johnson was going into business for himself. Maybe I'm seeing it differently, but that looked like some unprofessional bullshit going on there, brother. If I were Jarrett in that situation, I don't know what I would have done. I mean, it'd be one thing to try to confront the guy about it, but like, fuck, what do you do in that situation? I mean, the fact that Vince was watching it happen in real time, that should have been a clear indication that maybe this Ahmed Johnson experiment was not worth the investment. I know Vince was hung up on the physique of the guy. Couldn't see through his own blind spot. Holy shit, dude. I don't know how anybody else ever thought this guy was any good. I mean, I know most fans out there always thought Ahmed Johnson was rotten. But I still hear people out there claiming he was a missed opportunity and should have been WWF champion. In what fucking rational universe? So then we had the hog pen match. The match that should have reasonably killed Hunter's career dead in the water. Lucky for him, he was shaboinking the boss's daughter a few years later and managed to save his own ass. I never said Hunter wasn't smart. I was never a fan of his. But he was a brilliant politician. He knew how to live up to his gimmick of playing the game. So, for those that forgot about the roles to the hog pen fiasco, allow for me to refresh your memory. The objective was to throw your opponent into the hog pen, presumably for the hogs to shit on. Of course, these particular hogs were all taking a nap, so they weren't even awake enough to want to shit on anybody. For reasons that were never explained on television, they just assigned Hillbilly Jim to be the special guest referee. I have no clue why. I mean, I love Jim, nothing against the guy, but the hell did he have to do with any of this? I just like how the entire concept of this match is to throw your opponent into this giant fucking hog pen that they've constructed toward the top of the stage. And meanwhile, where does 80% of the match take place? Well, the wrestling ring. Naturally. Even at the point where they actually started brawling toward the hog pen, then they just turned around and started making their way back to the ring to do moves. It's funny, too, because, you know, this match is very infamous for a really serious laceration that Hunter sustains toward the end of it. He gets whipped into the metal gate of the hog pen, and you don't see it immediately, but he ends up coming up with this huge gash on his upper back. Of course, Hunter initially wins the match after he backdrops Godwin into the hog pen. But then after he tries to shove Hillbilly Jim around, Godwin grabs Hunter and then hip tosses him over the barricade. Then he press slams him and drops him into the mud. And then for the next several minutes, you have Hunter taking back bumps in the mud and just rolling around in this pig shit. And he's got this open wound across his back. Blood is just spewing all over the place here. Can you say hepatitis, anybody? And literally, all that for a bullshit match that half the audience was asleep for. I think the whole thing went like 9 minutes. It was certainly every bit of those 9 minutes. I was counting down the clock from the opening bell. But things are about to get a whole lot better for Hunter afterwards. Because you know who he's slated to feud with next, right? The Garbage Man. Duke Droese. Yeah. But y'all can't wait for that feud. As far as Owen Hart versus Diesel goes, it's kind of like the Ahmed Johnson squash. You know, the whole thing was so damn short, it's hard to even really call it much of a match. You essentially had two quasi-heels going at it here. Owen's most definitely a heel. Diesel's what the modern kids like to call a tweener. even though that's not an actual proper wrestling term. I guess here he was more of the ass-kicking babyface. You know, they barely even drew attention to this on the Go Home show. I'm serious, I had no idea Owen and Diesel were even feuding until last week. You know, apparently this all stemming from Owen trying to claim that he was responsible for putting Shawn on the show from their match back on Raw a month ago. Because everybody knew Shawn and Diesel were close. You know, they basically put Diesel in the position of coming to Shawn's defense here. Of course, it still doesn't help to explain or justify why he attacked Bret at Survivor Series and acted like an unprofessional dick after losing the title, but I think we're well past that point now. God, this 50 Shades of Grey booking fucking sucks. I hate towing the line personalities in wrestling, where you can't tell what side of the fence they're on. The only time they ever got that right in professional wrestling was when they did it with Sting. And it was because they had built up an entire year's backstory of him getting lowballed and punked around by his friends, to where he finally lost trust in everybody and said, fuck it. You're all on your own. I'm only looking out for my best interests now. And he was never necessarily a heel, but they spent like 12 months giving you the impression that he was. I can tell you right now, this booking of Diesel in late 95, early 96, it is nowhere close to what Eric Bischoff was doing with Sting on Nitro. I don't even know what the hell Nash is supposed to be anymore. Aside from an egomaniac trying to do whatever the fuck he wanted, because, I mean, he knew there'd be no consequences. And the booking in this match was so stupid. Diesel beats up Owen for 99% of the match. Just totally burying the guy. He's about to win with the jackknife. But then he takes his foot off Owen's chest at 2, teases that he's about to go for another jackknife until he just turns around and shoves the ref out of the way for no reason. So he gets disqualified. But then he still powerbombs Owen anyway and then leaves under his own command. The hell was any of this supposed to accomplish? Just a total misuse of Owen Hart. Criminal misuse at that. And like, you know, I just think back to the whole idea of In Your House. I know these aren't the big 4 pay-per-views. I know we're not supposed to expect these grandiose pay-per-view caliber matches or anything. But like half these segments on this card were things that they easily could have put on Raw. In fact, most of them are Raw segments, period. The stuff with Jarrett and Ahmed, Diesel beating up Owen in a 3-minute match, it did nothing for anybody. I mean, even the fucking Ted DiBiase Savio Vega segment that followed didn't belong on this pay-per-view. Where they're just actively stalling time and doing a bunch of hokey comedy that nobody's reacting to. Also, what? Well, so they can reveal that it was Balls Mahoney under the Santa outfit the whole time. Who gives a fuck? Why is this happening on In Your House? This is the kind of shit you save for the final Raw of the year when you know nobody's watching. That way you can do your stupid comedy bits and it doesn't completely neuter your company's credibility. Or who knows? Maybe they were trying to shave off enough time so that Undertaker versus Mabel didn't have to go 15 minutes. And by that logic, maybe I should be thankful that they did that Savio Vega Ted DiBiase skit. Because instead of having to watch a horrible Mabel and Undertaker match for 15 minutes, I only had to watch Mabel and Taker go 8 minutes in a horrible match. But you know what? as bad as this casket match was, it was probably the most cathartic payoff to any long-term feud we've seen in the entirety of 1995. It was actually precisely how Taker's return at Survivor Series went, when he just got in the ring and eliminated the entire opposition by himself. Very minimal selling on Taker's part. They tried to do some smoke and mirrors with Mo getting involved and trying to help Mabel stuff Taker in the casket. But then Taker got back in the ring and made his own comeback. Gave Mabel the worst chokeslam we'd probably see until years later when Taker tried to do the same thing to Hogan on television. And Hogan barely went up for him. That was in early 2000s? Well, Mabel at least went up for Taker here. He was just so fat he couldn't really get much height. So Taker rolls Mabel into the oversized casket. He then beats up Mo and then chokeslams him for good measure. And then right before slamming the lid shut on both former Men on a Mission teammates, he went down and grabbed his necklace. Because, yeah, you remember that whole deal where Kama molded the Undertaker's urn down into a gold chain? An angle that they shot back in April? Yeah, they apparently assumed everybody would remember that. I sure did. Being the Taker mark that I am. Guarantee you nobody else remembered. So again, was it terrible? Oh, hell yeah. Match was awful. But like I said, a terrible 8-minute match is absolutely more bearable than a 15-minute horrible match. So I'll take it. At the end of the day, I'm just glad we're moving on from all this Mabel stuff so we can gear up for Bret and Taker at the Rumble. It definitely wasn't the best match they would have together. But at least it's something involving Taker that I can watch and not be embarrassed having to review. I mean, I've covered enough of the dreck that was The Undertaker's feuds from 93 until now. I think I'm ready to sink my teeth into something good. Before we get to the Rumble match, though, we do have to talk about Bret's match with Davey Boy here. The main event of In Your House for the WWF Championship. A rematch from Wembley Stadium 3 years ago. Only that match was for the Intercontinental Championship. This one was for the WWF Championship. They also had 10% of the audience in attendance for this pay-per-view as opposed to the Wembley show, but that's beside the point. Of course, they had the walking ball of charisma that was Diana Smith in Davey's corner. Yeah, she really lit the world on fire with her comatose interview on Raw the other week. I like when Jim Ross tried to ask her about her emotional state headed into this match, to which I asked, what emotion? Emotion from Diana? Jim Cornette's Santa-themed tennis racket had more emotion than Diana did. Not that I'm trying to run her up the flagpole or anything, but I mean, she made it so hard for me not to poke fun at her throughout the entirety of this match. Especially when we get to the point where they kept doing the split screen shots to show Diana's reactions to everything. Translation, her stank face. She had one blank facial expression which purely read utter confusion. She knows she was supposed to be acting on camera. She had to pretend to be concerned. Guarantee she practiced it in the mirror 100,000 times. And it was so bad. It actually started to detract from the match the longer they kept honing in on her. Because you go from watching this epic bloodbath one moment to seeing Diana have to pretend to be worried for the well-being of her husband and brother. And you're just like, has this woman ever shed a tear in her life? She looked like a lifeless robot. But let me start by saying this. When it comes to the work between Bret and Davey here, I think a lot of people often look back at the match these two had at SummerSlam 92 and say, it was a great wrestling match that was entirely carried by Bret. I've heard that criticism over the years. I often think that does Davey Boy a disservice because I've seen that match 100,000 times. And it was not a one-man working show. I mean, was Bret calling a lot of the spots? Yeah. If not the vast majority of them. But to say Bret was solely responsible for that match being iconic, that's unfair to Davey. And I always kind of resent this bullshit propaganda that's been spread over the years that Davey Boy was carried and he really didn't contribute much to the success of the overall match. Nah, I call BS on that. I think that's some reductionist history right there. Now, did this match meet the credentials of what these guys did 3 years prior? I would argue no. And there are things you have to take into consideration here. It was 3 years later. It was a different crowd, different environment, different circumstances with the face-heel dynamic. But when you remove all those potential criticisms, this was still a damn good title match. And another clear-cut textbook example of Bret going above and beyond to try to make a main event title match mean something. Even if many would consider this a throwaway title match that really didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. And again, while the story lost a bit of its luster when you think, especially back to what they did in Wembley in 92, they still worked this like a grudge match. Beyond my pot shots I took at Diana's horrible acting ability here, it was still a serious world title match that you could have booked on any card in the territories and it would have gotten over like wildfire. You could have done this in just about any venue, in front of any crowd. The story here with Bret getting posted on the floor and blading himself from asshole to appetite, that really added to the drama with Bulldog just beating on him for minutes on end. Like the several near falls where he actually thought for a split sec, Bret might not kick out in time. But then he barely lift his shoulder up to stay alive. And here's the thing. Kind of like what they did in 92. They played to the strengths of both talents. Davey working over Bret and overpowering him. Bret is the babyface in peril trying to fight from underneath and miraculously make his comeback when the odds are up against him. I mean, this was all extremely well done for a title match that really didn't seem white hot going in. Even when you trace it back to what happened at the last In Your House when Bret cost Davey his title match with Diesel. Because that's kind of what the story of this match stemmed from. But God, that match with Diesel was so abysmal. I think fans are just glad to see the fucking thing end. But this is a totally different situation. And you get that great finish where Bret's barely got anything left in the tank. Doesn't have enough strength to hold Davey in the sharpshooter. So, sort of a nod to the Wembley Stadium finish when Davey outsmarted Bret and then got the flash pin when he stacked them up. Bret basically trapped Davey in a cradle pin and scored the victory. When you saw the bitter disappointment on the face of Davey afterwards, he basically knew that he got outplayed. But rather take the low road like Diesel did at Survivor Series. There was no afterbirth. Davey took the loss. Bret got his win back after 3 years of waiting for this big moment. That was it. It was good stuff. I liked it a lot. It was kind of a cliche these days, but sometimes the best matches are the ones that are very simple and easy to digest. And you don't need to dilute it with gimmicks and angles and over-the-top shenanigans. Just keep it stupid simple. And the people will accept it. You know, it's a shame that everything on this show largely sucked. It's also why I said I wasn't going to spend an hour and a half trying to break everything down in detail, because it's really not worth it. I mean, the only thing on the card worth checking out is the main event. You pretty much forget everything else that happened prior, because none of it meant a goddamn thing. I mean, you essentially had one pay-per-view caliber match preceded by an hour and a half of glorified TV segments. And again, it's unfortunately what a lot of these In Your House pay-per-views are shaping up to be now. I mean, you really aren't missing much if you happen to miss or skip over one of these events. And you know, by that same token, same kind of holds true for a lot of these end-of-the-year Raws. You know, you skip one here and there, it's not like you're going to be downright confused as to what's going on. I was half tempted to say, fuck it, I'm not even going to bother recapping this one. But it is the last recorded Raw of 1995. It's sort of a milestone in our WWF journey. I can confidently say we've reached the finish line. We've survived the threshold. We have successfully reviewed the entire WWF library of 1995 for Raw. And considering how unearthly terrible the vast majority of these programs have been, I consider it a milestone. Now, granted, the WWF got smashed in the ratings this week, going head-to-head with Nitro. I'm halfway wondering if it was a result of the previous night's pay-per-view. Whatever the reason may be, Raw did a 2.3 up against Nitro's 2.7. So you can tack another win in the WCW column. And again, you know, whereas those numbers have been pretty close in the last few weeks, definitely within the margin of error, you know, this week it wasn't even close. And I know last time I did a bit of a card comparison between the two programs, you know, just to see what Nitro was offering in terms of a 1-hour card, without even bothering to look and see what was happening on the other channel. I can already see why Nitro beat Raw this week. Just take the opener as a prime example. And look, I'm not even trying to poon Jeff Jarrett, but that segment in Your House with him and Lawler was absolute death. It just went on and on and on and on for a fucking eternity. And like, I know he wrestled Fatu here. It was just a brief enhancement match to put Double J over, since he just made his return after the brief Memphis run. But when they showed that clip of him attacking Ahmed with the record plaque, even if you were a fan that didn't buy or order the pay-per-view the previous night, like, instinctually you see that and you're like, oh Christ. They're really going to have Jeff Jarrett feud with Ahmed Johnson. Nobody wants to see that. Oh yeah, did I mention Jarrett was wrestling Fatu? Yeah, this gimmick still sucks. I mean, there's nothing really wrong with the match. There were a couple awkward miscues early on where Jarrett forgot to block punches from Fatu. They got off with their timing a little bit. But it was an all-right Southern-style territory match. You know, it's been a pet peeve of mine watching Jeff Jarrett matches for years. The fact that whenever he kicks out of a pin attempt, he doesn't actually kick out. He just lays flat on his back and then jerks one of his arms in the air at the last minute. It's It's the most bullshit thing I've ever seen. And so many people do it in today's business. Bothers the fuck out of me. I don't know when it just became tolerable to do that. When you lift your arms straight in the air, it counts as a kick out. Without your shoulders actually truly leaving the mat. And the finish was so dumb too. Fatu gives Jarrett the bulldog out of the corner, but then he goes down and starts selling his shoulder. So Jarrett tries to capitalize on this shoulder injury by applying a figure 4 leg lock. Because that makes total sense. And then Ahmed Johnson just hits the ring for the blatant DQ. Because at the point the heel had the match won clean, the babyface could not stand to see it go down that way. He had to ensure that the bad guy did not win fair and square. So yeah. By the way, that was Jeff Jarrett's return match to the WWF. He won via disqualification because another babyface tried to stop him from winning a match he would have otherwise won clean anyway. Some fucking amazing booking right there. So, well, before I talk about the Goldust pre-tape, I do want to point out a couple things about this Gorilla Monsoon interview with Michael Hayes. First off, a rare decision by a general manager that actually makes valid sense. Where Monsoon informs us that after Jeff Jarrett tried to insert himself into the 1996 Royal Rumble match, Monsoon is removing him from the Rumble match due to his actions at In Your House the previous night. Also because nobody gets to just magically assert their name into a Rumble match without actually earning their spot. Which is something I always bitch about every year when it comes to the Rumble. When people on Raw and SmackDown just come out and say, I'm entering the Royal Rumble and I'm going on to fulfill my dream of main eventing WrestleMania. Without actually earning their spot or qualifying for the match. So I'm glad Gorilla Monsoon isn't just letting the talent walk all over him. He is going to be wrestling Ahmed Johnson, so buckle up for that fiasco. We do also have Bret and Taker set in stone. And Diesel is not happy about the decision. So, well, there's your foreshadowing for the upcoming WrestleMania plans for Taker. Spoiler. Anyway, moving on to the Goldust inset. Let me just, let me attempt to summarize this without getting too in the weeds. So factoring in everything that happened at the pay-per-view the previous night, this infatuation that Goldust seems to have taken upon Razor Ramon. Well, we heard Goldust talk about it here, and he wants to... He made it clear that he was interested. Oh fuck, how do I put this? He wants to ooze machismo with Razor. Together. But yeah, hey, in completely unrelated news, Buddy Landel wrestled a match that lasted a little more than 45 seconds. Granted, his opponent was nothing to jump up and down about. Spark Plug Bob Holly. And you know what the funny thing is, too? He'll probably end up being one of the 30 Rumble participants. Yeah, Double J could not qualify for the Rumble match. But good old Sparky Plug earned his Rumble payday. Oh, by the way, here's a wonderful piece of trivia. 17 years. That is how long Buddy has waited to wrestle for the World Wrestling Federation. 17 years. Only to show up on Monday Night Raw and have to wrestle Spark Plug Bob Holly. Hope the wait was worth it. And did he wrestle the match like he had a point to prove? Not in the fucking slightest. This was the worst Buddy Landel match I think I've ever seen. I don't even think it's fair to say he was half-assing it here. He was quarter-assing it. Beyond the two extraordinarily long sequences where he just laid on Holly in an armbar and scissor hold, this is a total clash in styles. And my God, the longer it went, you could hear the crowd getting deader and more silent. I have no idea why they gave this match as much time as they did. But you want to talk about the epitome of time filler. And to top it all off, this actually made me laugh. Despite Buddy's shitty performance, he still went over with the elbow drop. Now, my hindbrain assumed that because he wasn't even trying here, well, of course he was doing the job, right? But then he won. I was like, what? Does anybody actually remember how long Buddy was around in the WWF? It could not have been any longer than a month, right? Knowing Buddy's track record. I mean, I love Buddy and all, but he was Buddy Landel. That's all you can say. So following the break, I was not mentally prepared for this turn the channel heat segment that they followed. Literally the split second they come back from break, who should be screaming into a microphone but Brother fucking Love? And I'm just like, oh dear God in heaven, why? Just why? Why is Brother Love back on WWF television doing his god-awful gimmick like it's fucking 1988 all over again? I mean, I was mainly trying to figure out what the hell the point of this segment was. Looking back, I don't think there was one. Ted DiBiase is standing in the ring with Bruce. He begins recapping the Santa segment from the pay-per-view. The angle that we completely skipped over because, seriously, what the fuck? So he starts talking about the fake Santa, which again was just Balls Mahoney with a buzz cut. Apparently the newest member of the $1 Million Corporation. Because why not? But he's not Santa. This is the important part. His name is actually Santa Claus. He's from the South Pole. Yeah, I'm not making that shit up. They aired this on television. They aired a skit where DiBiase tried to get over Santa Claus. Because this was Raw the week before Christmas and nobody was watching anyway. Crazy to think this show lost to Nitro. Unbelievable. But I know you're all just dying to hear my thoughts on Yokozuna versus Razor Ramon for the Intercontinental title. And you know, despite all the mind game fuckery going on with Goldust throughout the match, the work was all right. I mean, Yoko was far from motivated at this point. But he still had a decent match with Razor. I'm still with the belief that Scott Hall had some of the best worked punches in the history of the business. God rest his soul, man. If he saw the punches the boys were throwing in the business today, I don't even want to know what he'd have to say about it. So, again, they're having a fine little title match here. Despite Goldust watching from the top of the aisleway, he doesn't actually do anything to get involved. He just kind of stood there admiring Razor's physique. And so, right as Razor's making his comeback, he gives Yoko a bulldog out of the corner. Then all of a sudden, the lights start flickering. And then for whatever reason, here come Paul Bearer and The Undertaker, wheeling the casket down from the previous night's match. I guess we're to believe that Mabel and Mo were still inside the casket, although it was never revealed. Based on history, we know that Yokozuna is deathly afraid of caskets in storyline. So the minute he sees the casket being placed at ringside, well, Yoko just runs for the hills. Gets himself intentionally counted out. Meanwhile, JC and Mr. Fuji are looking on at ringside like, what the fuck? Those were my thoughts when I saw the end of this match. I mean, I wish I had more to elaborate on, but looking back, I don't know what the point of any of this was. And I'm trying to connect the dots here. The feud is Bret Hart versus The Undertaker for the WWF title at the Royal Rumble. They've already established that. They've likewise planted the seeds for Diesel and Taker headed into Mania. Yet they just randomly have Taker come out and start taunting Yoko with a casket. Despite that we've already seen 2 casket matches between these two in the last year and a half. What are they advertising here? Something for Raw at the beginning of the year? Is it for a house show or a live event? But when's the next In Your House? That would be in February, right? That's the one where I think Diesel wrestles Bret in the cage for the title. Does Taker wrestle Yoko on that pay-per-view? I'm genuinely asking. I have no idea what the point of any of this was. All I know is they came back from break, getting ready to air another wow, feel sorry for me Shawn Michaels tribute video. Razor's doing an interview with Doc, basically letting everybody know he's straight. He's not interested in fucking Goldust, but thanks for the offer anyway. And then as soon as they started that Tell Me a Lie song, and they got the HBK footage queued up for the tribute package, that's when I tapped out and said, oh, hell no. Even I'm not about to sit through that horse shit. Tell me a lie. You want to know who the liar was in all this? Shawn Michaels. Giving the people the impression that he's retiring from wrestling after that fake concussion angle on TV. No wonder this guy flopped as WWF champion. Seriously, like, I don't even know what to say. It is the literal same crap I've been saying about this concussion storyline for weeks. I hated it then. I really hate it now. Especially with the way they're blowing it out of proportion. And just think, the fact that this is the very last thing they aired on Raw to close out the year. What a way to go out. A literal whimper instead of a bang. Good God. You know, it's odd. For as much WWF content as we covered over this weekend, there really wasn't a whole lot of it that I enjoyed. You know, the retro stuff that was already a given. I still don't know what I was expecting with that PLE, but clearly they were not setting the bar all that high. Maybe it was the start time, I really don't know. What I do know is I'm about ready to wrap this shindig up. So make sure you all come back to check out the next episode of the FSWR podcast. And we're getting closer and closer to the end of the year, which means I need to keep monitoring when I'm going to do the end of the year special. It'll probably happen on Monday. Of course, as I go to my calendar, probably looking at the 30th. Sounds about right. So just be on the lookout for that. Evidently, that'll probably mean that, well, I guess that would make sense, right? Because there's no Retro Raw until the start of January, so yeah, that would be the ideal time to do it. Still don't know what topics I'm going to cover on that. I know that I'll have a top match of the year list, but in terms of other coverage or notable items of discussion, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So, thanks for tuning in, everybody, and talk to y'all soon. Peace out.